Hello Dungeon Delvers, and welcome to the Dungeon Directory, your source for all guides Dungeons & Dragons. And today we're going to be discussing something really important. It's going to be my 5 tips for making your combat more engaging. You all know that feeling of looking around a table and seeing your players on their phones or chatting with each other or just not paying attention. It can be infuriating. Dungeon Masters, we put so much time and effort into our battle maps and atmosphere for you to have to answer the question, what happened? After every round. How can you as a DM make your players more interested in your combat encounters? I've made a list of my top 5 best tips for Dungeon Masters to make their encounters that much more engaging and help keep their players' attention on the game. So without further ado, let's delve right in. Tip number 1 is to give your players choices. We all know the generic combat intro of as you push your way through the heavy wooden door and take a quick survey of your new surroundings, the shadows begin to swing themselves around the edge of the room before standing on their own, posturing to pounce. Roll for initiative. Well, it'll start to get boring after a while. It's like if you sat down for a movie or a show and the first hour was slow and boring. Of course you're going to be checked out by the second one. Combat is the same way. Now you might be thinking, well, that's how combat starts. But it doesn't have to be. The best way to mix it up and make it more engaging is to give your players choices. Now, there are 2 kinds of choices you can give your players: pre-combat and mid-combat. Let me give you an example. As you approach the old rotten door, it slowly squeaks open with a loud screech. On the other side, a group of 5 goblins all sitting around a large bonfire, talking and laughing, turkey legs in hand. And as you step into the room, the chatter quickly falls silent as the group turns to you before freezing, not moving a muscle, all simply staring like deer in the headlights. What do? That's an example of a pre-combat choice. It gives the players control, and control will keep them focused. If they decide to attack the goblins, then roll initiative and treat it the same way as you treat any other combat. If not, give them the chance to change plans and take a unique approach like diplomacy. Here's an example of a mid-combat choice. As the kobold chieftain raises his spear high and begins to charge towards you, out of nowhere he stops, quickly glancing at the walls and roof of the cave for a split second, before 6 massive ankegs burst out from the ground surrounding the party and the kobolds. Immediately, the chief turns back to his men and shouts something in Draconic before lodging his spear into the nearest ankeg and falling backwards towards his comrades. Right away, the players have a choice to make. Should they turn and fight the new threat of the ankegs, use the chaos to take out the kobolds, fight both at once to try to take out both threats with one swing, or try to retreat and let the 2 parties battle it out before returning to clean up the fight that's left? In both the first and second examples, the players are giving something more to do than to simply pick the nearest enemy and roll an attack. It'll make them think and discuss among each other, weighing the most optimal decision in each situation, and making sure the players feel like they have a real impact on the pace of each battle, ensuring they stay engaged with what's going on. Tip number 2 is to give your monsters dialogue. This is one really small thing that can keep your players engaged during your creature's turn. It doesn't require anything major to make this one work. Just have your creatures talk during their turns of combat. It could be anything from a battle cry to trying to issue commands or begging for their lives to even just taunting your players. Having a creature leader turn towards his mage and call out, "Keep the big one tied down, I'll deal with the rest of them," before he dashes past your party's barbarian and makes a sprint for the wizard will create urgency. Or having a creature proclaim allegiance to an NPC who was originally helping the party. This can get your players thinking. How do these creatures know the NPCs? Is there something suspicious going on? Or if you don't have any complicated plot tie-ins, then just keep it simple. Have an orc call out a barbarian for his stench. A goblin proclaim how lame the sorcerer's spells are after succeeding a saving throw. You can mention how pathetic a fighter's attacks are after doing a low damage hit. These are things that'll make your party personally want to fight these creatures rather than just a boring hack and slash. It'll be a personal fight where the players want to get involved and squash these creatures. Tip number 3 is to challenge your players' strengths. Usually your players have some kind of strategy they back up on almost every fight. And if you think your players don't, I urge you to watch closer. You'll start to see patterns emerging. Things like having casters lock down the biggest enemy in the fight, while the martial classers zerg them down in one turn. Or using beefy frontliners to turtle up a fight and let casters rain down fire on anything that moves. If you let your players do this every battle, that style will get stale. So challenge those strengths. Now there are two ways to do this. The first way, I want to emphasize, I never recommend that you do this. So the first way is to counter your party. An example would be to use a full encounter of strong flying creatures against a party that's primarily melee PCs. Sure, this fight will be hard, but it won't be a fun, challenging encounter. It'll be an awful, slow encounter of 4 to 5 players just holding their actions to attack the creatures that fly past. Your players will feel like you're out to get them during encounters like these, and it'll make them feel bad about these fights. This can have the opposite effect we want, by making the fights less engaging and encouraging players to, for lack of a better word, do nothing. The second way to challenge your players' strengths is a much more engaging way to approach the situation. Instead of countering them, beat them at their own game. Force them to try a different tactic than they normally do. If the party normally stays back and peppers enemies with arrows every fight, then put them up against a creature who can outduel them at range. This will still give the players agency to play their normal fashion if they choose. Granted, it'll be a tough fight to make that work. Or they can choose to mix it up, abandoning their ranged weapons to close the gap and take the fight to the enemy. But just keep in mind that if you plan on making your players swap out their playstyle they're built for, they're going to be weaker, so give your players a chance. In this situation, make sure the ranged creatures have low ACs and low hit points for when your players arrive. That way, even PC's ranged builds can stand a chance to cause some havoc. If your party's a bunch of burly minotaurs, put them against a foe who's bigger and stronger. Maybe scatter massive bear traps around the battlefield, so that players can lock down the big monster, then go in for some damage. Get creative with these, and put interesting things around your battlefield that your players can use to turn the tide in these really tough battles. Tip number 4 is to mix and match your creatures. This is one of the easiest changes you can make to instantly improve your combat and make it way more exciting. You could put your party against the most interesting creature in the monster manual, but if it's just the one creature, it's going to be a non-memorable fight. So sprinkle in some other creatures and get really creative with it. Instead of just throwing a handful of hobgoblins at the party, maybe you have the hobgoblins ride out of the tree lines on the backs of owlbears. Or make a kobold scale sorcerer reach into his pack and pull out a scroll of control water before sending a rushing wave at the party full of hungry reef sharks. You're the DM, so you can really reach into the monster manual and pull out any 2 creatures you want and have them work together for any reason. This alone will make your fights way more memorable and interesting. The 5th and final tip is going to be the single biggest tip on this list. Use the environment. I cannot stress this enough. Dungeons & Dragons world is so big and magical. Use it. There's no end to what you can do here. If you're fighting in a dank swamp or a dense jungle, consider maybe some of the fauna in the area is predatory and will lash out at players or creatures if they get too close. If your party's in an old building in the woods, maybe some of the floorboards are old and rotten, and when a PC steps on them, it splinters under their feet, causing them to fall prone. Once enough boards have been broken, it'll cause the whole floor to collapse, throwing the party, along with the creatures, into the basement. Get creative with this. Think outside the box. If you want to bring your environments to the next level, make sure to add height to your battle maps as well. Cliff sides, towers, pits, or crevices are great ways to do this. Mix this in with environmental effects like acid that rushes across the low ground once around, stalactites that fall from the roof on anybody who's not undercover. It'll greatly improve your combat. So make sure to strongly consider the environment of each encounter, and your players will love your combat. So thank you so much for sticking around to the end of the video. If you enjoyed this topic, it'd be hugely helpful if you considered liking the video and subscribing to the channel for more weekly D&D content. If you had a topic you wanted me to cover, go ahead and leave it in the comments below. Thanks for watching.